Taking a look at Dan through another theory lens, I'm going to take a look through attachment theory. So, also taking a look at definitions from the Rogers text, Ainsworth proposed that the quality of attachment in early infancy affects subsequent social behavior and development. Later, it says that others suggest the relationship between attachment in later peer development may be more complex, with other psychosocial factors also influencing the development of friendships. Oops. Well, it's cut off a little bit here, but I'll read it. I think it's a little bit difficult to make a concrete assessment based on infancy attachment styles because the interviewee, Dan, isn't a good source of information on what his attachments were like when he was an infant, and his parents weren't alive to be able to interview and get any information about it. It can be extrapolated based on his parents' parenting styles later because his mother was highly emotional, accusatory, guilt-tripping, shaming, and angry, and his father was cold and distant. It can be assumed that his early attachments and relational interactions, based on these temperaments, were very similar. Looking at the ongoing development of his relationships and attachment styles in later childhood and adolescence in relationship with his parents, it can be deduced that Dan probably had an insecure attachment style of some type. Seeing the nature of his relationships in adolescence, the difficulty with peers, especially around racial issues, we can see that, but also he was able to form good relationships in the community, and he did have good friends who also weren't Jewish and didn't have any racial issues. We see that he had resilience, he had normative relationships and good community connections. It's possible there were surrogate role models in his life to fill the parental attachment roles in his later formative years. Looking at limitations of Erikson's approach, I think the limitation for Erikson is that he focuses on single periods of time in life as having specifically large impact on the whole of the individual, such as looking at adolescence as the impact on the entire rest of his life. Supposing one psychosocial crisis is not overcome, it's suggested that the rest of the individual cannot develop normally throughout the rest of his life, whereas strengths perspective would say that his resiliency and other abilities would compensate and help him to overcome his problems as they relate to each other, rather than blaming one developmental hurdle for all of the rest of the problems in one person's life. Basically, the interaction of many different factors is more complicated than looking at one psychosocial crisis. Finally, as the last outcome, looking at whether or not Dan was able to overcome his psychosocial crisis, I believe he was able to resolve and form a solid positive identity. Though he faced several problematic factors in his development, reiterating family dynamic issues, facing anti-Semitism and prejudice, as well as self-esteem and body image issues, he was able to make adaptive connections within the community, healthy friendships, and ultimately establish himself as an autonomous and capable young adult through advanced education and employment. Through his triumphs, I believe he was able to solidify his identity and overcome the pitfalls of identity confusion, though, like most teenagers and adolescents, there was plenty of unsurety and confusion throughout his development. Here's a list of the articles I used from the Annotated Bibliography project, as well as the Rogers text as the source of references. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I look forward to seeing all of yours and communicating over the various Erikson stages. Thanks. Take care.